Welcome, Juhi. So, in digital, I think digital came with a lot of promises, right? It talked about becoming more accountable. It talked about consolidation, having a single view of customer, all that. And yeah, long back, the marketing used to be about the 4 Ps from Kotler, right? Product, price, place, and promotions. But then in the recent digital era, what we have seen, there is so many different digital products which have come into being, almost as per the MarTech uh, infographic which got released. So there, I think 11,000 plus products are there. So making them, and in a typical enterprise, we would find almost 18 to 25 such products, and making them talk to each other has been a difficult task.
Absolutely.
So what's your experience has been in digital with this?
Sure. So I have been in digital for about 12 years. And with different companies, I think the similar struggle at different stage of businesses has been like that. So at Myntra, when we started exploring this thing, which was quite long back in 2016 odd, we finally realized that I think we have to build it in-house. And WebEngage was obviously one of our partners. And then when we went to Geo, it was a very different scale of business that we were talking about. So there were 20 such platforms that, let's say, we would work with for different use cases. Now I think the landscape definitely has evolved a lot after COVID specifically. And you may find a lot of them talking about a lot of solutions, at least under one umbrella. And we have been on journey on finalizing some of them. Having said that, still, because digital is evolving so much, there is no one solution fits all sort of approach. You may still need to get, let's say, few integrations done, and which is okay, because the cost of integration versus getting stuck to a technology which is not evolving is way better choice that one could make, versus, let's say, going to an archaic model and realizing that sometime later on it's not scaling up to the aspirations of business. So it's been an interesting journey. But thankfully, I think Indian tech system has evolved so much. And I think, like I was telling you on the sidelines, that if you give a problem to a techie, they will not say no and like come back with some feasible solution. So that's been really the tech revolution within Indian ecosystem. So yeah.
Working with iconic brands like Parachute, Geo in the past, right? So definitely customer experience in today's era has become the battleground, and brands have to fight it out. So there will be competition outside, there will be competition inside.
Yeah.
So even there is a broader product array which is there in your portfolio itself, right?
Yeah.
So there is hair and care, Medicare,
Yeah.
in that hair care segment
Yeah.
itself. So for the end customer, if we have to see, that point of interactions have evolved. So long gone are the days when just a website or a mobile
Yeah.
app could be the thing, right?
Yeah.
So there are different new channels which have proliferated,
Yeah.
and customers are looking at some kind of a omni-channel view. So where they expect that when I go and research about a particular product, whatever price is there on one particular channel, it should be similar to that on the other channel,
Yeah.
right? Or at least a better price
Yeah.
compared to that,
Yeah.
right? So in your experiences across all of these, how the companies which you have been working with have been dealing with this kind of scenarios?
Yeah. So thanks for that question. Very interesting question, and I'll give you two perspectives. One, when we were at Myntra, and recently we also acquired Jabong, and Flipkart was also selling fashion. So three of them had fashion portfolio. What we did is that between the three companies, we developed a one customer view. And we realized that between Jabong and Myntra, there is a very less overlap. And between Flipkart and Myntra also, there is less overlap. And obviously, between Flipkart and Jabong, there is absolutely nil overlap. But what we really did is that we developed a multi-touchpoint sort of a personality profile of 14 consumers within fashion world. And which actually drew the personalization journey for the fashion within the three companies. And we realized that, let's say, for example, there is an urban trailblazer woman who's a globetrotter looking for global brands, new on season, and they are having a very high attrition within Myntra because, like, we kept showing them discounts, right? but that is not what they are really looking for. They are looking for like international brands and all of that. And that is actually a good fit for, let's say, Jabong, right? And we will, whenever there is a new brand global launch is when Myntra will reach out and like Jabong will reach out to them on most of the days. And then there is a trendy sunshine girl who's like a Gen Z who has so many occasions to buy and looking for fast fashion and things like that. So that's where a lot of private label brand of Myntra fit in, like Dressberry, Roadster, things like that. So that's how we started dividing our like portfolio. And also, let's say, what we did is that right from acquisition to, let's say, end conversion to a call center experience was very, very differentiated for each of these segments that were tagged at backend. Now, at Marico, this journey has been in a very different zone because a lot of time you do not have control over everything. So let's say Amazon may fund certain discount or run an ad that you may or may not have full control on. Having said that, what we try to do is at our end, whenever a brand speaks to a consumer, whether it is in an offline mode visibility or like, through a WhatsApp community or through a, let's say showing them an ad and leading to either our brand website or e-commerce site, we try to control the communication from that standpoint. Having said that, what also happens is that some of the times this consumer is coming to multi-portfolio. Like you said, a Parachute Advanced consumer may also come to a bio oil, and like a live-on girl can also go somewhere else, and so on and so forth. So their brand communication is brand forward and not Marico forward. So they don't know that, at the end I am actually interacting with a corporate brand which holds a house of brand. So that's very interesting to do that. Having said that, we do cross-leverage the data, and we realize that some of our hair fall brand have a high correlation with bio oil consumer, which is for pregnant women, etc., and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's like managed in a very interesting way in both the worlds.
Lovely. You brought in an interesting perspective about the single view of the customer, the holy grail for marketing,
Yeah.
right? So you mentioned about how different customers in India, we are able to leverage the different brands data and use it.
Yeah.
So in my experiences with some other customers that I've been working with, so there are, there's a big parent brand, under that there will be sub brands which would be there.
Yeah.
And then sometimes what happens, they compete internally as well. So what they do is they face some kind of challenges around doing the cross-sell upsell.
Yeah.
Because those brands have own contractual obligations, and
Yeah.
that inhibit the sharing of data,
Yeah.
and that becomes a challenge. So have you also faced similar kind of scenarios in your experience?
Yeah, so many of times it's not like one-off problem. So even in Myntra, let's say within fashion, many of brands will compete with each other, right? And sometimes they will be private label brands, sometimes within house of brands of private label, or sometimes it's a brand where we have a brand partnership and then like our brand is also talking to them. So obviously like data sanctity is very important, but more importantly, it's about the consumer experience. So at the end, all of it should not lead to a situation that, they end up having a bad experience or a non-unified sort of a experience with the same brand. So that's what is the holy grail for us. Within Marico also, let's say aloe vera as a ingredient is there in hair and care, as well as, let's say, Parachute aloe vera. But the proposition of both of them are very different. So when we reach out to one consumer, it talks about soft hair. When we reach out to through second brand, it talks about frizzy hair and things like that. So that ways we try to communicate very differently and reach out to consumers at very different instances. So one would be in a situation when, let's say, damage is happening. So let's say Holi was a big event for example, hair and care. But for aloe vera, it's a very different, so like whenever you have situations of monsoon and things like that, so then we will reach out. So that ways we try and differentiate.
And these brands, you are selling it through different channels.
Yes.
You are selling it through different modes. Now, when customer is going ahead increasing, of course, the consumer engagement, customer experience is important. But then how do you go about understanding or defining that, whatever spend which I am doing, so be it on the online or on the offline side, that is being justified.
Yeah.
So determining the definition itself has shifted, right?
Yeah.
Earlier it used to be ROI, now it is return on ROMI, return on marketing investment.
Yeah.
So how do you go about defining that for these channels, right? For these products.
Yeah.
So what kind of a perspective do you take? Do you have similar KPIs for online and offline or for different brands? So what's the typical approach that you take?
So let's divide it into three parts. First one is, let's say the brands which have a heavy offline sales happening, while they may or may not get influenced through a online communication or online experience. So in that case, obviously MML is there. And specifically for brands like Parachute and Saffola, that's like a very important framework to decide where to spend my monies, because some of the channels are actually not giving me high ROIs for that matter. Then secondly, what we also do is multi-channel attribution, which is looking at e-commerce data on a daily basis for the platforms where we get daily e-commerce sale and all the digital interactions that may happen on a daily basis. So let's say we may run a Facebook ad, we may have run a YouTube ad and things like that. We may have also done some blogging, or there is a sentiment rise or downwards. So all these inputs would lead to finally the e-commerce. So even on e-commerce there can be like a pricing change and things like that. So all these inputs go into the model and then it's regressed against the e-commerce sale, which would tell the elasticity of each of these spends. So that becomes a choice making for brands which have e-commerce to so digital to e-commerce sort of a conversion. And lastly, we do not stop just there. We have something called as digital quotient, which actually measures the efficiency of everything in digital. And this is a outside-in approach and like a framework that we have developed in-house, getting inspired by digital IQ framework that Gartner has. So we look at some 170 brands in India, around 400 matrices, and there is a weighted distribution of those matrices depending upon how they fare against the business. And at the end, you get an index score out of 100, and we rank everybody. So it also includes, like, let's say, the likes of all the Unilever brand, or let's say digital first brands like Mamaearth, etc. And then we come to a single index score for everybody. And quarter on quarter, this movement is looked at, and for each of our brands, then we would get into a diagnosis with the brand team saying that what worked, what didn't work, how do we move the scores up. Sometimes, let's say, DTC ACOSs were not good, so like what were the campaigns that were run and things like that. On e-commerce, there is a bestseller loss and things like that, so how do we fix that? So all those happen, and we divide our brands into three archetypes. One is digital first, wherein, let's say, 40% plus of e-commerce sale is the contributor to total business. Then there are digital SKU, which is in between, and then there are core brands which have a very high GT and MT contribution. So like under 10% of e-commerce contribution. So that's how we define our brands. And like between these framework and these three archetypes, there is a like what's more important for who kind of a decision.
So having that kind of a KPI framework, so it varies across the brands.
Yeah.
It varies across the channel.
Yes.
But there is no one definite metric which determines the success across Phygital world. So you need to look at the dimensions separately.
So let's say at a very high level, we would look at ROAS and DQ as two matrices, but each of the brand cohort will also take a call as what is more important for me.
True. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So with this kind of a KPI-driven measurement and analytics framework, definitely moving towards application of a lot of these data science models requires consolidation across the enterprise, operating across businesses, breaking the organizational silos, data silos requires, right? Because when you want to deliver experience, it can't be that the customer whom I am selling or whom I am doing marketing, and when he comes back with some kind of a customer complaint could be different.
Yeah.
So I need to have some kind of a consistent view which I'm delivering across all those customer first touch points. Yeah. Right? So now, how do you envisage the current and the future, what's the vision which you have on this side of?
So, ideal case stage would be what I talked about, what we did in Myntra, but FMCG context is very different. So there is, a huge base of consumer calls that we get through our call center, who are, let's say, Saffola and Parachute loyalists. And then if they face a problem, then they would be like even taking that much effort to looking at back of pack and calling the call center. So obviously that's a very, very engaged consumer. So for them, we have developed certain kind of communities, and some of our NPDs actually have to pass through this consumers, test. Apart from that, let's say retailers and dealers are in a way are extended consumers. So that we have, reached out through certain apps that are developed for them. And lastly, digital is a massive set of data. So from the D2C business, all the consumers that we have got actual like PI data, and also a heavy digital spend wherein at least up to click or engagement you have some sort of data, or like let's say website visitors for that matter. So all this we are trying to, so there are some experimentation on, and we are trying to sort of like stitch them up. But in future, what I also see is that somebody who's going to a Kirana store and like buying your product and then having a sort of an interaction there through a app or something, and then experiencing it online and then making a purchase is going to be a critical factor, and which will be in a true sense for FMCG omni-channel. But how do you nudge the retailer who's right now there, and like there are 20 more brands sitting there, and ensuring that they make that purchase to your brand and experience some sort of a digital intervention there?
The definition of omni-channel and real-time itself has been debated multiple times across multiple forums, right? Now, for some, it could be like maybe customer clicks on it today and come back tomorrow. Could have been fine, maybe sometime in the past. But in today's era, a lot of millennials, Gen Zs, the expectation is instant gratification.
Yes.
People want things on the fly. So how do you see the brands coping up with that? The real-time, what's the kind of real-time definition which you are seeing?
So again, like I mentioned, for each of the cohorts is very different. So I'll give you two varied examples. So one is obviously one of our brands, which is Beardo. There we ran a campaign called Beardo Dawn, and like that sat very well with the consumer, and like suddenly like there is a millions of consumers who are interacting with us on social media, etc. And it was very important to engage with this consumer to ensure that like whatever engagement through the campaign they had, it also finally converts into purchase. So in that case, at backend, we were ready, and we were expecting some numbers, but not 1 million, for example. But we were ready. So we had already created a mass level engagement program through Sprinkler, and whenever an instance of such happened, there was a in a way 4 to 5 templated reply, which to you looked like a personalized message, was engaged. And post that, depending upon what they reacted, then we would say, hey, why don't you buy this particular product, depending upon like what works out well for them. So that's how, like, let's say from social to commerce, that kind of a thing. And we were able to engage with 1 million consumer in 3 minutes. So let me put it that way. So it was really real time. Yeah. And for then the second set of brands, which is more core, there we believe it's also important to give the right response and engage with them in the right manner. So specifically in the cases wherever there is a health issue, or there is a skin issue that they have faced with our product, there is also a legal and crisis team involvement. But we try to respond to 100% of consumers, and there the response is like, we would love to connect with you on phone, because it's also about that consumer getting like this thing. So it's important to pacify them. So a voice always helps. So in that case, it's diverted to a call center, and then they would speak to them. But still the TAT in that case would be 1 to 3 hours at max.
Sure. So 1 to 3 hours is
Yeah.
a decent benchmark.
Yeah.
Right. Now, you touched about personalization, so taking care of customers coming from diverse cohorts, different personality, psychographic, demographic profiles, and taking care of them. Now, world is talking about hyper-personalization, right? But then hyper-personalization sometimes goes beyond the boundary which is there.
Yeah.
So do you think there is something like a respectful personalization or a responsible personalization which exists? Or is it just a thing in the cloud?
So it doesn't exist, but as a, let's say, company, you have to decide that, like, what's the boundary. And obviously, like, all of us have experienced some sort of like hounding of like, you know, messages. If you by default like visited a website and then they follow you on Facebook ads, sometimes you also get a WhatsApp message and then you also get a call and things like that. So you have to decide what is the tipping point for that consumer. Having said that, obviously we also drive some bit of personalization in that sense, but we ensure that there is a number of times that how we will reach out to them by all the channels put together. So we keep it at max 2 to 3 in a week, and if the consumer does not convert, then obviously like they like the proposition, then something else needs to change. So we would do 3 trials with different proposition, and if they do not convert, then like we would give it a gap and then reach out to them with a different proposition or a brand after some time.
Of course, thanks to tools like Web Engagement, which
Yeah.
helps with some of these, right?
Yeah.
Where we are able to determine the limit at which the fatigue would be there.
Yeah.
So having some kind of a predictive fatigue where we could understand what, how many emails we have sent out to the customer, what's the open rate, what's the kind of click-through we have
Yeah.
generated, and whether the customer is actually just receiving it and doing a shift delete or
Yeah.
actually going ahead and doing the
Yeah.
clicks and taking it forward in
Absolutely.
the customer journey,
Yeah.
right? So definitely interesting. Thank you, Juhi.